Where are your wife and children?
In the garage. That's where suit them both.
Mom, why does Dad hate us so much?
Don't say such about your father ever again, understood?
Her husband kicked her and her kids into the garage. An hour later something happened. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Ruth Williams lived like an ordinary woman, but she controlled an empire. At 35, she was the hidden majority owner of Aulia Global Holdings, a global investment company few people truly understood. Her name never appeared in headlines. She preferred it that way. Her mornings were quiet, coffee, market reports, silent decisions worth millions. She believed real power did not need applause. Her penthouse overlooked the city skyline, yet she avoided luxury displays. Simple furniture. Neutral colors. No loud gatherings. She loved painting at night, losing herself in abstract strokes that reflected emotions she rarely showed. Ruth valued authenticity above status. She wanted relationships built on sincerity, not money. Margaret Williams, her sharp-minded mother, had raised her to study people carefully. "Watch how they behave when they think you're small," she would say. Ruth listened. She built her empire patiently and learned to measure hearts before revealing wealth. She never imagined love would test that lesson. Elijah Jones had a presence people noticed the moment he walked into a room. Tall, confident, and naturally articulate, he knew how to command attention without trying too hard. At Stratwell Consulting, where he worked as a mid-level operations coordinator, Elijah was known for volunteering first, speaking boldly in meetings, and celebrating even small wins as if they were milestones. Recognition energized him. Compliments stayed with him for days. Yet beneath the confidence lived a quiet fear. He was terrified of living an ordinary life. He grew up in a modest neighborhood with his mother, Teresa Jones, who constantly reminded him that respect was earned through visible success. She admired status and often compared him to wealthier relatives, planting a restless hunger in him early. Elijah promised himself he would never be overlooked. He read biographies of influential executives, studied how powerful men spoke, and practiced presenting ideas with authority. To him, success was not just about comfort. It was proof that he mattered. Still, there were moments he could not explain, moments when someone else's promotion unsettled him more than it should, or when applause for another felt like something stolen. He masked it with charm, telling jokes, offering handshakes, staying socially indispensable. Few realized how deeply he needed validation. Elijah wasn't cruel, nor was he unkind. He simply measured his worth through admiration. And without knowing it, that hunger was slowly shaping the man he was becoming. The storm arrived without warning, swallowing the city in sheets of rain that turned streets into mirrors of trembling light. Commuters rushed beneath awnings, taxis vanished within seconds, and the sharp scent of wet asphalt filled the air. Ruth Williams stepped calmly toward the curb, her coat neatly belted, her expression unreadable despite the chaos around her. Just as a lone taxi slowed, another hand reached for the door at the exact same moment. Elijah Jones paused, slightly breathless from running, then offered an apologetic smile when their eyes met. For a brief second, neither spoke. Rain tapped loudly against the roof of the cab while passing headlights flashed across their faces. Elijah gestured politely. "We could share it. The city isn't giving either of us many options tonight." Ruth studied him quickly, noting the confidence in his posture and the ease in his voice. She nodded once and slid into the opposite seat. What began as a practical decision soon unfolded into effortless conversation. They spoke about the unpredictability of city life, the books they enjoyed, the quiet satisfaction of personal goals. Elijah found her thoughtful. Ruth found him refreshingly direct. By the time the taxi crossed the river, the storm had softened into a steady drizzle. Neither seemed eager for the ride to end. Elijah felt an unusual calm around her, as though he didn't need to perform to be interesting. Ruth noticed his ambition, but also the sincerity beneath it. When the cab finally stopped, there was a small pause, an unspoken reluctance. Elijah asked if he might see her again, expecting hesitation. Instead, Ruth handed him a simple card with only her first name and number. As she stepped back into the damp glow of the streetlights, neither realized that a shared taxi in a storm had just redirected both their lives. Their connection grew quietly, without spectacle or pressure. Elijah discovered that time with Ruth felt easy, untouched by the competition that shaped most of his days. They met in small bookstores, compared favorite passages, and laughed over their completely different tastes in music. Ruth suggested long evening walks where conversation replaced distraction, and Elijah found himself opening up about his goals with surprising honesty. She listened carefully, never interrupting, asking thoughtful questions that made him feel understood rather than judged. Ruth was deliberate about the life she showed him. She chose modest restaurants, drove an unremarkable car, and spoke little about her work beyond calling it investment consulting. Elijah admired what he saw as her independence and calm self-sufficiency. There was no dramatic need for attention, no social climbing, no performance. With her, success seemed less like a race and more like a direction. He began imagining a future shaped by steady partnership rather than constant striving. What Elijah did not realize was how carefully Ruth observed character. She noticed the way he thanked waiters, how he spoke about his mother, how his eyes brightened when discussing progress. These details mattered more to her than charm. For the first time, Ruth allowed herself to experience love without analysis. She believed she had found someone who valued her for her presence alone. And slowly, almost without noticing when it happened, their separate routines blended into something that felt remarkably like home. Elijah proposed on a quiet hill overlooking the city just as the sunset softened the skyline into gold. There was nothing extravagant about the moment, no crowd, no dramatic display, just a simple ring and a voice steady with hope. Ruth said yes without hesitation, her calm smile hiding how rarely she allowed emotion to guide her decisions. Their wedding followed the same philosophy, elegant, private, attended only by a small circle of friends and Elijah's mother, Teresa, who was immediately fond of Ruth's composure and grace. Shortly after the wedding, Ruth made a decision she told no one about except Victor Hale, her trusted legal officer. She arranged for Elijah to be hired at Aurea Global Holdings through a competitive restructuring initiative, ensuring his resume rose naturally to the top without appearing favored. The role came with better pay, stronger visibility, and a clear path upward. When Elijah received the offer, he was stunned. He called it the breakthrough he had worked toward for years, never questioning how seamlessly it arrived. Ruth simply celebrated him, her pride genuine. That night, Elijah spoke excitedly about the future, promotions, leadership, the life they would build. Ruth listened, content in the knowledge that she could quietly remove obstacles from his path while still letting him earn every step. To her, love meant protection without possession. Watching his confidence expand filled her with a rare warmth. She believed she had given him not just opportunity, but stability. And as they settled into marriage, Ruth allowed herself to trust that the life ahead would grow from mutual respect, unaware that hidden gifts sometimes plant invisible distances. Months passed, and Elijah adapted quickly to his new role at Aurea Global Holdings. His ideas were suddenly heard, his presentations approved, his influence expanding faster than he had imagined. Colleagues began greeting him with respect, and senior managers remembered his name. Each achievement fed the quiet hunger he had carried for years. At home, he spoke often about momentum, about finally stepping into the version of himself he had always envisioned. Ruth listened with gentle encouragement, never revealing how closely she monitored the company pathways that ensured his progress remained steady but deserved. Success, however, began reshaping Elijah in subtle ways. He grew more conscious of appearances. Tailored suits replaced practical ones, expensive watches caught his attention, and conversations drifted toward status. Invitations to corporate mixers and networking dinners increased, and he accepted nearly all of them. Ruth noticed the change not as arrogance, but as distance. Their long walks became rare, replaced by quick dinners and postponed plans. When she asked about his day, his answers shortened, often interrupted by phone notifications he no longer ignored. Still, Ruth chose patience. She understood that growth sometimes came with imbalance, and she believed strong marriages adjusted rather than fractured. Meanwhile, their home expanded with the arrival of 2 children, Noah, observant and thoughtful even as a toddler, and Lily, bright-eyed with a laugh that softened any room. Fatherhood grounded Elijah briefly. He promised himself he would build a life worthy of them. Yet somewhere between ambition and recognition, a quiet shift continued. Ruth sensed it without naming it, trusting that what they built was strong enough to hold. She did not yet see that comfort can sometimes disguise the earliest signs of separation. As Elijah's reputation inside Aurea grew, so did the invitations waiting in his inbox. Private networking lounges, executive cocktail evenings, leadership retreats, spaces he once only imagined entering were now familiar ground. He learned the language of influence quickly: firm handshakes, steady eye contact, measured laughter at the right moments. People began associating him with upward movement, and Elijah carried himself with a confidence that bordered on performance. At home, Ruth noticed he spoke less about purpose and more about positioning. It was at a winter corporate reception that Elijah met Clara Benson. She had a magnetic presence that drew attention without effort, dressed with understated elegance and speaking with deliberate warmth. Clara worked in strategic partnerships, a role that required both charm and calculation, and she possessed plenty of both. Their first conversation was brief but memorable. She complimented his clarity during a recent presentation, and Elijah felt the familiar spark of recognition he secretly craved. Unlike others, she seemed to study him, as though already measuring how far he might go. After that night, their paths crossed often: morning elevator rides, shared conference discussions, quick conversations that lingered a little longer each time. Clara had a way of making ambition sound glamorous rather than exhausting, and Elijah found himself energized around her. Meanwhile, Ruth continued her quiet routines, trusting the rhythm of their marriage even as it subtly shifted. She believed distractions passed when foundations were strong. What she could not yet see was that temptation rarely announces itself loudly. It enters through ordinary doors, settling gently until its presence feels natural. The change did not arrive dramatically. It unfolded in small, almost forgettable moments. Elijah started coming home later than usual, often carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne that wasn't his. When Ruth asked about his evenings, he answered casually: client dinners, extended meetings, unexpected planning sessions. His tone was never defensive, just distant enough to close further questions. At first, Ruth accepted it as the weight of professional growth. Ambition required time, she reminded herself. Soon, however, impatience crept into his voice. He grew critical of things that once never mattered: the simplicity of their home, Ruth's preference for quiet weekends, even the meals they used to cook together. He began suggesting they should live a little more visibly, hinting that success deserved display. Ruth listened calmly, neither arguing nor agreeing, simply observing. What unsettled her was not his desire for refinement, but the subtle dismissal beneath it, as though the life they built was suddenly insufficient. One evening, Noah excitedly showed Elijah a small academic certificate he had earned at school. Elijah glanced at it, offered a distracted nod, and returned to answering messages on his phone. Lily tugged at his sleeve for attention, but he gently pulled away, promising later. Ruth watched the children retreat, their energy dimming, and something quiet shifted inside her. Respect, she believed, was revealed through attention. She did not confront him that night. Instead, she grew more watchful, sensing that love was beginning to share space with something colder, something neither loud nor sudden, but steadily reshaping the atmosphere of their home. The house remained beautiful, orderly, and outwardly peaceful, yet its emotional rhythm had begun to change. Elijah moved through rooms like a visitor with limited time, his mind often elsewhere even when physically present. Morning conversations shortened into practical exchanges, and dinners were increasingly eaten without him. Ruth adjusted quietly, keeping routines stable for Noah and Lily, school runs, bedtime stories, weekend breakfasts filled with gentle laughter. She refused to let the children feel a tension they were too young to understand. Noah, perceptive beyond his years, started noticing patterns. He observed how his father's chair was often empty and how his mother never complained about it. One night he asked Ruth why work seemed more important to adults than home. She answered carefully, explaining that responsibilities sometimes pulled people strongly, but love was measured by consistency. Lily responded differently. She clung closer to Ruth, sensing comfort in her steady presence. Their bond deepened naturally, forming a quiet triangle of reassurance within the larger house. Meanwhile, Elijah found himself increasingly drawn toward environments that reflected momentum, places where conversations revolved around deals, expansion, and recognition. Clara was frequently nearby at these gatherings, always composed, always encouraging his forward gaze. At home, stillness now felt unfamiliar to him, almost like standing still on a moving walkway. Ruth noticed the emotional distance, but chose dignity over confrontation. She believed that reacting too quickly could fracture what patience might still restore. Yet beneath her calm lived a growing awareness. A family does not divide all at once, it separates slowly, through moments when presence becomes optional. The shift became harder to ignore the evening Elijah mentioned Clara for the third time in a single dinner. He described her as exceptionally sharp, someone leadership trusted with sensitive negotiations. Ruth listened quietly, cutting Lily's food into smaller pieces while Noah spoke about a science project. Elijah seemed energized as he talked, his admiration slipping into his voice without restraint. When Ruth finally looked up, she noticed something unfamiliar, not just professional respect, but fascination. Weeks later, rumors began circulating within the company corridors. Nothing explicit, just knowing glances and conversations that paused when someone approached. Clara and Elijah were often seen arriving together at early meetings or staying behind after others had left. Their collaboration was praised for efficiency, yet the frequency of their partnership invited speculation. Ruth heard none of this directly. Instead, fragments reached Victor Hale, who considered whether to inform her. He chose silence, trusting Ruth's instinct to perceive what others missed. One evening confirmed what intuition had already whispered. Elijah returned home later than ever, his shirt slightly creased, his expression alert rather than tired. As he set his phone down, the screen lit briefly with the message preview, Clara's name followed by a short line that read, "Tonight was effortless." Ruth said nothing, her composure unbroken. She asked about his day, and he answered smoothly, offering details that sounded prepared. In that moment, Ruth understood something important. Truth often reveals itself without confrontation. She felt no impulse to argue, no urge to accuse. Instead, a deep stillness settled within her, the kind that appears when observation replaces assumption, and when the heart begins preparing for clarity rather than comfort. Ruth did not react outwardly, but her awareness sharpened. She began noticing timelines, when Elijah left, when he returned, how often his phone tilted away from her view. Her calm remained intact because she believed emotion clouded judgment. Instead of questioning him, she shifted quietly into observation. At Aurea Global Holdings, she scheduled a private discussion with Victor Hale under the simple pretext of a routine executive review. Behind closed doors, her voice was steady as she requested a discreet audit of internal communications tied to leadership projects. Victor understood immediately. Gather facts, not assumptions. At home, nothing about Ruth's behavior suggested suspicion. She continued her routines with the children, helped Noah construct a complex model bridge for school, and spent an afternoon teaching Lily how colors blended on a canvas. Yet internally, Ruth was preparing structures the way she always had, with precision. Legal documents were reviewed, asset protections updated, guardianship details clarified. She believed preparation was not pessimism. It was strength. If stability fractured, she would not allow chaos to reach her children. Meanwhile, Elijah grew increasingly comfortable with secrecy, mistaking Ruth's composure for unawareness. Clara's influence expanded subtly, strategic lunches, private jokes, messages that arrived late but never seemed inappropriate enough to alarm anyone who might glimpse them. Elijah convinced himself he deserved admiration wherever it appeared. What he failed to see was that Ruth had stopped relying on words entirely. She was now reading patterns. And patterns, once clear, rarely mislead. Without raising her voice or changing her expression, Ruth was positioning herself for whatever truth decided to surface next. The argument began over something small, an overdue school form Elijah had forgotten to sign. Ruth mentioned it calmly while clearing the dinner table. Elijah, already tense from a demanding week, responded sharply, accusing her of questioning his priorities. The exchange escalated faster than either expected. Words that had been restrained for months surfaced with force. Elijah complained that he carried the financial pressure alone, that he was exhausted from being the primary provider. Ruth stood still, absorbing each sentence, knowing he had no idea how false the belief was. Clara's name entered the argument unexpectedly. A neighbor had mentioned seeing Elijah at a restaurant with her, and Ruth repeated the observation without accusation, simply asking for honesty. That was when his pride ignited. He called the conversation an invasion, accused her of mistrust, and insisted she was overreacting. The children, drawn by raised voices, stood frozen near the hallway. Noah stepped slightly in front of Lily, protective despite his age. Elijah noticed them watching but did not soften. Instead, frustration overtook restraint. In a surge of anger he would later struggle to explain, Elijah grabbed a small suitcase from the closet and pushed it toward Ruth. He told her if she doubted him so deeply, she and the children could spend the night in the garage until she learned respect. The words were harsh, final. Ruth did not argue. She knelt calmly, helped Lily put on her shoes, and placed a reassuring hand on Noah's shoulder. Without tears or raised voice, she guided her children toward the garage space attached to the house. The door shut behind them with a hollow echo. Elijah believed the silence meant submission. He did not understand that silence, in Ruth's world, often meant decision. The garage was dim except for a narrow strip of light slipping through the high window. Lily clutched Ruth's hand, confused but quiet, while Noah tried to appear brave, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for explanation. Ruth crouched to meet them at eye level, her voice soft and steady. She told them this was only a moment, not their future. There was no anger in her tone, only certainty. Then she reached into her coat pocket and made a single call. Her words were brief, "Bring the car. Now." Within minutes, the faint hum of an approaching engine cut through the night. Headlights swept silently across the driveway before disappearing as the vehicle stopped just beyond Elijah's line of sight. Miles Bennett, Aurea's head of security, stepped out first, moving with efficient calm. He opened the rear door of a long, polished Rolls-Royce, its presence almost unreal against the ordinary suburban setting. Noah stared, recognition dawning that his mother was far more than she appeared. Ruth offered no explanation yet. She simply guided them forward. She did not look back at the house. Not once. As the car door closed with a muted finality, Ruth allowed herself a slow breath, not of relief, but of resolve. Miles handed her a secure tablet already displaying prepared documents. Everything she had quietly arranged was now in motion: temporary residence secured, legal actions activated, executive notifications scheduled. The vehicle glided away so smoothly it seemed to erase its own departure. Inside the house, Elijah remained unaware, assuming the night would cool her defiance. He never saw the car, never heard it leave. And in that unnoticed departure, the balance of his world had already begun to shift. The next morning, Aurea Global Holdings issued an urgent internal memo. All senior and mid-level managers were required to attend a mandatory executive meeting at noon. The message carried the signature of the board chairman, Harold Whitmore, and contained no explanation. Speculation spread quickly across departments. Elijah read the notice twice, then allowed a slow smile to form. After months of strong performance reviews and visible project wins, he believed the timing made sense. Promotions were often framed as strategic announcements. He straightened his tie, already imagining how the room might respond to his name being called. Clara approached him mid-morning with subtle excitement. She suggested the meeting likely involved structural advancement and hinted that leadership had been unusually attentive to their recent work. Elijah felt validated. He walked through the office with a posture sharpened by expectation, offering confident nods to colleagues. Daniel Brooks, his longtime friend inside the company, noticed the anticipation in Elijah's expression but said nothing. The boardroom was prepared differently than usual: press-level lighting, additional security presence, and a formal seating arrangement that suggested something larger than a standard update. When the meeting began, Harold Whitmore stood at the head of the room with unusual composure. The tone was serious, deliberate. He spoke about ownership, legacy, and leadership clarity. Then he announced that Aurea's majority shareholder would formally assume executive authority effective immediately. The doors at the rear of the room opened quietly. Elijah turned, expecting perhaps an unfamiliar industry magnate. Instead, Ruth Williams walked in, calm, precise, unmistakably composed. The room shifted instantly. Elijah's breath stalled. In that silent entrance, the foundation of every assumption he held began to fracture. Ruth walked to the head of the boardroom without hesitation, her steps measured, her expression composed. The atmosphere thickened with stunned silence as executives rose instinctively. Elijah remained seated for a second too long, confusion locking him in place before realization struck. Sophie Carter stood beside Ruth, placing a leather folder on the table with quiet precision. Harold Whitmore addressed the room formally, confirming that Ruth Williams was not only the majority shareholder but the original founder of Aurea Global Holdings. The words landed with controlled weight. There was no applause, no spectacle, only shock. Elijah's mind raced through every memory, her modest explanations about work, her quiet evenings, her calm detachment from corporate praise. Every promotion he had celebrated suddenly rearranged itself in his thoughts. He realized she had been positioned above him all along. Clara's face strained of color, her posture stiffening as she recalculated everything. Ruth did not look at Elijah immediately. Instead, she reviewed a short statement about accountability, transparency, and leadership integrity. Her tone was steady, professional, untouched by emotion. Then she turned to him. Not with anger, but with clarity. She stated that a breach of executive ethics and conduct had been verified through internal review. Elijah's employment was terminated effective immediately. Security would escort him after the meeting. A second envelope slid across the polished table, divorce papers, already signed. The room felt impossibly still. Clara lowered her gaze, already distancing herself. Ruth's final words were simple: decisions have consequences. She gathered her documents and exited as calmly as she had entered. Behind her, the silence felt louder than any accusation. For several seconds after Ruth exited, no one moved. The quiet carried a weight that pressed against every person in the room. Elijah stared at the envelope before him as though it might disappear if he refused to touch it. Terminated. The word echoed louder than the chairman's voice had. Two security officers approached with respectful professionalism, waiting rather than forcing. Elijah finally stood, his confidence stripped away so quickly it left him unsteady. Around the table, colleagues avoided his eyes, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. Power had shifted in a single moment, and everyone could feel it. Clara gathered her tablet with controlled urgency, whispering that she was sure this was all a misunderstanding. Yet she did not step closer to him. Instead, she created distance, both physical and emotional. Elijah noticed. The realization cut deeper than the termination itself. Daniel Brooks watched from across the room, sympathy clear but restrained. He gave a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that some falls cannot be softened by friendship. As Elijah was escorted through the open office floor, conversations halted mid-sentence. Just hours earlier he had walked those same miles expecting advancement. Outside the building, the afternoon air felt unfamiliar, sharper somehow. Elijah loosened his tie, trying to steady his breathing. His phone remained silent. No reassuring message appeared. When he finally opened the envelope, the divorce filing was unmistakably real, precise, legally airtight, already in motion. For the first time, he understood the scale of what he had misjudged. Ruth had not reacted impulsively. She had acted with preparation. Standing there without title, without certainty, Elijah sensed something far heavier than professional loss. The life he assumed was permanent had shifted overnight, and there was no immediate path back. By evening, Clara Benson had disappeared from more than just Elijah's side. Her office desk was cleared, her email account deactivated, and her name quietly removed from internal directories. Officially, she had requested personal leave. Unofficially, she had assessed the situation and exited before association could damage her own standing. Elijah tried calling her twice. The first call went unanswered. The second went directly to voicemail. No explanation. No reassurance. The admiration that once energized him had dissolved without ceremony. News of Elijah's termination spread quickly across corporate networks and social circles that once welcomed him. Invitations stopped. Messages slowed. Teresa Jones called in disbelief, demanding to know how her son could lose everything so suddenly. Elijah struggled to answer. He could not admit that his success had been structured by the very woman he dismissed. For the first time, he felt the absence of applause. Silence surrounded him, not the strategic silence Ruth mastered, but an isolating one that echoed with consequence. Meanwhile, Ruth relocated with Noah and Lily to a private residence owned discreetly by Aulia's holding trust. The children adjusted faster than expected, reassured by their mother's steady presence. Ruth did not speak ill of Elijah. She focused on stability, new school arrangements, secure routines, quiet evenings restored. In board meetings, she remained composed and decisive, strengthening internal ethics policies without referencing personal history. Clara vanished from public visibility entirely, her ambitions redirected elsewhere. Elijah watched his world contract, understanding too late that loyalty built on status rarely survives its loss. Days blended into one another as Elijah confronted a life stripped of the identity he once carried so confidently. His access cards no longer worked, his company laptop had been surrendered, and the structured rhythm of executive calendars was replaced by long, uncertain hours. He sat often in his apartment, replaying conversations he wished he had handled differently. For the first time, he examined not what he had lost, but how casually he had treated what he already possessed. Ruth's calm strength, the children's quiet affection, the stability of home, he had mistaken them for constants rather than privileges. Practical realities soon followed reflection. Recruiters who once returned his calls immediately now responded with polite distance. Industry contacts spoke carefully, their tone respectful yet detached. Reputation, he realized, traveled faster than explanation. Daniel Brooks visited one evening, bringing nothing but straightforward honesty. He reminded Elijah that careers could be rebuilt, but character required deliberate repair. The conversation lingered after Daniel left, not his criticism but his clarity. Elijah began to understand that ambition without humility had narrowed his vision. Across the city, Ruth continued leading Aulia with composed authority. Under her direction, the company announced initiatives supporting employee development and ethical leadership, reinforcing a culture rooted in accountability. At home, Noah and Lily filled the new residence with cautious curiosity that soon turned into laughter again. Watching them settle reminded Ruth why decisive action mattered. She held no interest in public vindication. Peace was enough. As Elijah faced the quiet dismantling of his former illusions, Ruth stepped forward into a future shaped not by reaction, but by intention. Ruth did not retreat into privacy after the revelation. She stepped forward with deliberate visibility. Aulia Global Holdings announced a new expansion strategy under her direct leadership, strengthening international partnerships and reinforcing transparent governance standards. Industry publications began referencing her as one of the most strategic minds in modern finance. Yet outside the boardroom, she remained grounded. Evenings were reserved for Noah and Lily, homework at the dining table, quiet storytelling sessions, weekend visits to museums where curiosity replaced tension. She rebuilt their rhythm patiently, ensuring security felt natural rather than protective. Noah adapted to his new school with thoughtful resilience, channeling his analytical mind into robotics competitions. Lily discovered a love for music lessons, her laughter returning fully as confidence replaced uncertainty. Ruth watched them grow stronger through stability, understanding that resilience is not loud, it is steady. She also revived her late-night painting habit, filling a studio room with bold colors that reflected both loss and renewal. Creativity became her release, not from pain, but from pressure. Meanwhile, Elijah attempted to re-enter professional circles through smaller consulting opportunities. The path was humbler, less certain, but honest. He began attending leadership workshops not to network, but to listen. Public recognition no longer guided his steps. Reflection did. Though regret lingered, he gradually accepted that rebuilding required patience. Ruth did not monitor his progress, nor did she obstruct it. She focused on forward motion, new beginnings built not on reaction, but on clarity. For the first time, her strength was no longer hidden, and it required no explanation. Spring arrived gently, carrying with it a sense of renewal that seemed to settle naturally into Ruth's life. One Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of her home as Noah carefully assembled a robotics model while Lily practiced soft piano scales nearby. The house no longer felt like a place of recovery. It felt complete. Ruth stood for a moment watching them, realizing that peace was not the absence of hardship, it was the result of choosing stability when it mattered most. She had not simply survived disruption, she had reshaped her world with intention. Professionally, Aulia reached new heights under her leadership, but Ruth measured success differently now. She prioritized time, presence, and emotional clarity. During a charity art exhibition she quietly funded, she met Adrian Cole, an urban architect known for designing community-centered spaces. Their conversation was effortless, grounded in shared values rather than impression. Adrian admired her perspective before ever understanding the scale of her influence, and Ruth appreciated the absence of pretense. She did not rush the connection. She allowed it to unfold naturally, guided by discernment rather than hope alone. Elsewhere in the city, Elijah continued rebuilding a quieter life, gradually understanding that respect is sustained through consistency, not status. He carried lessons forward with humility, determined never again to overlook what truly anchored him. Ruth wished him no harm. Indifference had replaced hurt, leaving only calm distance. One evening, as she closed her painting studio and glanced at a canvas filled with bright emerging colors, Noah and Lily ran toward her with laughter echoing down the hallway. Ruth smiled, drawing them close. The future no longer needed to be predicted. It was already taking shape, steady and full of promise. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.